Want to welcome everybody back to the Orange Crush podcast presented by Chick-fil-A of Clemson, Seneca, and Mason County in Greenville. We want to thank our first two sponsors for this new podcast Dave and I are doing. And we have a very special guest today, Gary Stokan, the CEO and president of Peach Bowl Incorporated, a position that he's held since 1998. We got a big matchup in a couple of weeks. We're 15 days, if I'm not mistaken, as the time of recording this podcast, from Clemson and Georgia taking the field in Mercedes-Benz. And we got Gary here to break it all down for us. Gary, welcome to the podcast, man. Thanks for your time.
Well, Grayson and David, it's good to be with you guys. I appreciate your interest in us and having us, and we're looking forward to hosting you guys when you come to Atlanta.
All right, so I have to start out with this, Gary. To me, you have a title in my head, which is not CEO, none of that stuff. You are the guy who brought college football to Atlanta.
Here.
You're the guy who brought college football to Atlanta. Let's just face it. You put this model together. You've had all of these great kickoff games, playoff games, SEC championship games, national championship game. We've got this one to kick off the season. So here we go. This is the initial game, and then you're going to bookend it with the national championship in January. Number one, how much fun is that to kind of get it rolling with this premier matchup, and then be able to say that the season ends in that stadium?
Well, David, that's a nice compliment from you. I know you've been around college football a long time, and we've always appreciated our relationship with you and Clemson. And we're very blessed to have the opportunity to, host these big college football games. This year alone, we'll host two top 15 teams in the Aflac kickoff game with Clemson and Georgia. Then we'll host two top 10 teams in the SEC championship. Our Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl will be the first CFP playoff of the 12-team playoff, where we'll host, a conference champ. I think it's more than likely going to be the ACC champ, and we can talk about that. And then we'll host the national championship at the end of the year. But then, if you look forward, within 1 year, basically, between the Aflac kickoff game and the quarterfinal this year and the national championship, next year we'll host the semifinal game. So no other city has been able to host a quarterfinal, a national championship, and a semifinal all in 1 year, and a calendar year. And so we'll be able to do that over this next 2 years, basically. But, it's a lot of the reason why people call us the capital of college football. We're the first city to double host the national championship game, to have four top 15 teams, 4 games with top 15 teams playing in your city. We were just built for college football, and I'm very blessed to have been part of it, and we look forward to executing it now.
Now, wait a minute. I had not thought about this, but you just said something that piqued my interest. Clemson fans listening to this, potentially Clemson could play in Mercedes-Benz 3 times this season because they start out against Georgia. If they win an ACC championship and that bowl game is picked, could play there again. And then if Clemson makes a national championship, 3 games in Mercedes-Benz. That has to kind of be the goal, right?
Well, I told Dabo that at the ACC media days in Charlotte. I said, you want to play in Atlanta 3 times this year. Our Aflac kickoff game, our Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, and our national championship. And then when I went to SEC media days, I told Kirby Smart that he wants to play in Atlanta 4 times. Because with the Aflac kickoff game, the SEC championship game, our Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, and then the national championship game. So both these coaches, both these teams, both these fans, want to make Atlanta, maybe we'll sell I'll go into the real estate business and sell some real estate to Clemson and Georgia fans. They can take up residency. Although we have a tremendous amount of alumni and donors from both schools, Clemson and Georgia, living in Metro Atlanta.
And so when it comes down to the process of this game, because I think getting a matchup like Clemson and Georgia with a lot of history and both of these teams ranked in the top 15 heading into this, sort of on a year-by-year basis for this game, because it's different each time, and it's fascinating to be able to pull Miami and Alabama 1 year, or Clemson and Georgia Tech, or This year it's Clemson and Georgia. How do you guys, is it a committee that selects it? Is it based on these schools maybe contacting you guys? Like, how does that process work? And how does that selection process year by year? Is it planned out X amount of years in advance? Like, how does that work?
Well, Grayson, you're a young guy and you got a lot of hair. You look at my head, there's not much hair on it, and that's why. Pressure on me to come up with these matchups. And, it's interesting. Back in 2006, when the BCS wanted to bring a fifth bowl in to host a national championship game, we made a very strong bid, and we didn't win. They went to a double host model where the Rose and the Sugar and the Fiesta and the Orange hosted their bowl game, and then 2 weeks later they rotated the national championship. And so the next year, the NCAA had legislated a 12th game to the schedules. And I went to my board and I said to my board, look, because I'm a competitive son of a gun, I said, if they're not going to let us in the BCS on the backside of the season, we're going to start the BCS on the front side of the season. And I called it the Daytona 500 of college football. And I reached out to Terry Don Phillips, a friend who's the AD at Clemson, and they were going to be top 10 with Spiller and that crew. And I reached out to Nick Saban, who was in his second year at Alabama, and they had gone 7-6 his first year. People forget this. And they had to win their bowl game to finish with a winning season because they had lost to Louisiana Monroe. Now imagine Alabama and Nick Saban's year losing to Louisiana Monroe. He'd get probably thrown out of Tuscaloosa. But in his first year, they did.
Right.
And so we brought Alabama in to play Clemson, and I called it the Daytona 500 of college football, and immediately received a cease and desist letter from Daytona 500 saying, please refrain from calling your football game Daytona 500 of college football. And so, but that's what we did. We really changed the face of college football on the front side of the season, because prior to that, there were a lot of nondescript games of directional schools playing against a Clemson or a Georgia, and the score is 55-0, and people dying in the heat and the humidity, and TV ratings were awful. And so when we put Clemson, Alabama forward, it changed the face of college football. And for the last 17 years, we've been doing that successfully with having sellouts, with having huge payouts to the schools, and having huge TV viewership. So, it's been a win-win-win for the schools, the conferences, the fans, Atlanta, college football in general. And so, it's been a labor of love, but certainly a challenge to put all these together for sure.
And do you have like maybe a memorable
Also,
matchup for these because you talk about, ironically, Clemson, Alabama being that starting game and the rivalry that they sort of created in the 2010s. Is there a matchup for these kickoff games that really sticks out to you?
Well, being as old as I am and having kids and grandkids now, each one of these games are like your kids and your grandkids. They all have their own story, their own reason for existing, and they're all your favorite. So I don't have a favorite one, but I could tell you, if we had a long enough time, each year there's a story behind putting each one of these games together. This game, back in 2021, we were coming out of COVID. We had, I can't remember who our matchup was, but Dan Radakovich was the AD at Clemson and Greg McGarity at Georgia. And they had scheduled a game, and they wound up putting the game ultimately in Charlotte. And I called them. I said, we'd love to host that in Atlanta. They said, Gary, we were going to call you to play the game in Atlanta, but you had scheduled a game. And I said, shoot, I would have scheduled it on Sunday, or we'd have done a double header. We'd have made Clemson, Georgia work in Atlanta, because, it's a great matchup, great rivalry. And so we started to talk about future schedule to both Greg and Dan. And they said, well, we're thinking of doing a home and home, in 24, 25. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you do the rubber match in our Aflac kickoff game? And they said, yeah, we'd love to come back to Atlanta. So we're doing the front side of the rubber match, because next year and the year after they're going to play home and home. So, there's a story there how that one got put together. So, yeah, they each have their own interesting story, and each come about in a different way. And it's just me talking to a lot of coaches, a lot of ADs, looking at schedules, looking at recruiting, looking at coaches' contracts. I mean, I've got a grid that I use to, analyze everything as you get down the road here and try and get out 3-4 years to schedule things. Sometimes you hit it like, this year, Clemson and Georgia, although I will say, I knew Clemson and Georgia would be top 15 at the worst, because you're talking about two coaches that have won 4 out of the last 8 national championships, two programs that are fantastic, in our case, my case personally, very, very important to me, because not only do I have good friendships with Kirby and Mary Beth Smart and Kathleen and Dabo Sweeney, but they're both such good people that you want to do business with people that you really like, and I really like those two. And ironically enough, both have really, in my estimation, gotten their start in Atlanta in our kickoff game and in our bowl game. I go back to 2013 when Clemsoning was a word in the dictionary. And when Clemson, Taj Boyd hit Hopkins on 4th and 16, right on that field behind, of course, it was in the Georgia Dome, but right around the 40-yard line. And Clemson kicks the field goal to beat top 10 SEC team LSU in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. And then the next year beats Georgia, a top 10 SEC team, to start the season. The word Clemsoning went out of the dictionary. So I could point to Clemson's run and say it started in that LSU game in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. And say the same thing about Kirby. His first game was in our Chick-fil-A kickoff game against North Carolina. And they won that game, and that was the start of Georgia's dynasty that Kirby's built there.
When you say Clemson, Georgia, it brings a lot of memories to mind. David Treadwell, Kevin Butler, Tron Jackson, Vince Dooley, Danny Ford. So many names that are associated with this rivalry. Clemson fans will say, "Yeah, we didn't get Herschel Walker to come here." Herschel considered Clemson, but we held Herschel out of the end zone. Herschel never scored against us. Just so many great visuals. Athens, an hour up the road from Mercedes-Benz, Clemson an extra 45 minutes. What has the interest been like within the city for this game? Both schools get their allotment of tickets, but what has the interest been like there for this matchup?
Well, I'll answer that 2 ways. One is, to your earlier point, the rivalry is such a great rivalry. You wish this game would be played every year. I go back to this rivalry when I was with Adidas in the 80s, and I had Clemson wearing Adidas shoes when they won the national championship, and I still have the cover of Perry Tuttle running into the end zone in the Orange Bowl in his Adidas. And then the next year, I had Herschel Walker wearing Adidas when he was at Georgia, and Georgia wins the national championship. So these schools, probably aging myself, but I go back to 1980, 81, 82 with these two teams. And then to move forward now, our tickets, we've had to add 2,800 standing room only tickets for Mercedes-Benz Stadium for this game already. And this game might border on setting the all-time attendance record in Mercedes-Benz Stadium that has seen Super Bowls and SEC championship games and national championship games. Our semifinal with Georgia Ohio State in 03 or 23 is the record at 79,330 tickets. So this one's going to get close. I don't know if it's going to beat it or not, but it's going to get close. So we're going to have a sellout. And the great thing is, we don't control the suites. Mercedes-Benz sells the suites. So I don't know how many Georgia people buy suites. But from a ticket standpoint, both teams got the same amount of tickets. So you're going to see, 30,000 Clemson and Georgia people in that stadium that seats, 72,000. So it's going to be, it's not going to be a 60-40 or 70-30. It's going to be, close to 50-50, and if maybe a 55-45 split, but that's only going to raise the level of intensity in that building.
If you can, and I apologize, Grayson here. How did that, if you can tell us, how did the noon kickoff come about? Because I'm sure, for ever since we heard about this, I'm thinking this is going to be a 7:30, 8 o'clock kick, maybe 3:30. How did noon come about?
It's interesting. The evolution of TV and viewing is quite interesting over the years. You think back, it used to be the 3:30 slot was the slot, right? That was the slot, the big national games,
Right.
ABC, CBS. And then it moved to, having the night game. That was the big deal. And now, in talking to ESPN, and I think some of it is led by Fox, what they've done with the Big Ten games, their noon games where they put their biggest Big Ten game on at noon.
Right.
That has now become, particularly with ESPN and their game day, they want to take game day and help the audience of game day with a big noon game, number one. And number two, they want to use the big uh, viewing audience that you get from game day to lead right into a big game. So they work, to help each other with ESPN, and that's what they've told us. Secondly, they said, at that time of the year, you guys are in air conditioning, so you can play anytime. Thirdly, they said, there's Notre Dame at Texas A&M. And because they don't get Notre Dame games because NBC has the Notre Dame contract, but because Texas A&M's at home, it falls into the SEC contract. And so they can, SEC's with ESPN, they can put that game on. So they wanted to put that game on in the evening, two top 20 teams. So and it's Notre Dame where they don't get a chance to get them much. The one that was interesting to me, they said we got Florida, Miami, as well as Clemson, Georgia. You guys can play anytime in air conditioning. We think it may be a little cooler in the swamp at 4 o'clock or 3:30 with Georgia. I mean with Florida and Miami, than at noon. I don't know if I agree with that rationale. I think it's going to be warmer and hotter and with higher humidity at 4 o'clock, 3:30 in that swamp down there than it will be at noon. But we like the noon slot. It's changed the way people perceive that slot, and so I think the other thing, very frankly, not only did they want the big ESPN to build up game day because people are going to watch the noon game because we got the best game on in the nation. But I think they wanted our big viewing audience to lead into Miami, Florida to help that viewership, and then all that viewership to lead into Texas Notre Dame. So ESPN looks at things a little differently. We look at one game and say, we'd like to do this. They look at it holistically and say, how can we build a volume of audience through all this viewership to watch our network the whole day? And that's their business. So I understand that.
It's fascinating. I think, Gary, what I'd love to have you, I guess, break down for our audience is the week leading up to it. Because for us, when game week hits, it's everything. It's every single day. We got a Georgia, where it's focused, it's locked in. But for you, how does that week start for you? Just could you walk our audience through because as you've said, you've done a few of these kickoff games, you could say. And so what is that week leading up to Saturday, getting a game like this ready, prepared? What are sort of your responsibilities as you oversee this process finally come to fruition on August 31st?
Yeah, I always tell my staff, which is the best in the business, you got to be ready for the tsunami because the tsunami is going to hit on August 31st at noon. I mean, it's coming. Whether you're ready for it or not, there's going to be two teams coming out of those tunnels and we're going to play a game. So you got to be prepared. And so the preparation is more on the front side, a month leading up to the game rather than, a week leading up to the game. So just to give you an example, yesterday, we had 75 people in Mercedes-Benz Stadium and we had a 3-hour meeting and we went through every facet of team walks to practices to walkthroughs, to, ingress and egress of fans, the script and the whole deal, credentials, everything, and that, so, we're what, 15, 16, 17 days out. We had calls with both teams, this week to go over, the schedule. Leading up to, when the teams get here, Clemson's going to do a walkthrough on Friday. Georgia's going to have their, punters and kickers over. So you got to prepare for that. Lining the field, like behind you, you got the logo on the field. You got to get the, you got to get the field stripe. You got to get all the production that goes on the digital media boards. So we got to have a run through of all that, right? So we run the game before the game happens in the stadium. So it's almost like a practice run. And then once the teams get here, and that day hits, you got tailgate town going on. So you've got all those vendors, all those sponsors, all those partners setting up the week of to get ready for the fans to come on Saturday morning. The team walks, which is a huge, this year is going to be just phenomenal. The team walks as the teams park on Magnolia and pull all their buses up. And then, at 9:45, Clemson comes walking through their band and their cheerleaders and their fans to walk into Mercedes-Benz. And at 9:50, Georgia's walking. And so when you think about that, the first game of the year, 2 top 15 teams, probably the favorites in both their conferences to win their conferences and, get into the 12-team playoff. 2 teams, as I said, that, have dynasties built over the last 10 years. So it's going to be just a phenomenal experience outside in the team walks. And then a whole different experience when you get in the stadium and experience the loudness and the excitement and the energy, for the opening of the college football season. So, yeah, it's a lot of work. My staff does a great job, and Mercedes-Benz is fantastic. We got tremendous volunteers. And so, yeah, we're very, very blessed to be in a city that really gets college football.
For fans who want to make this a weekend experience, come in on Friday morning or Thursday night to obviously get a hotel. What else is there kind of built around the game that people can go do before they head to the stadium on Saturday?
Well, I always tell people if they haven't gone to the College Football Hall of Fame,
There you go.
Kickoff game, it's a must do. But I really want to reinforce that through you guys to the Clemson fans this year, because we're reopening the College Football Hall of Fame. On August 24th, we're going to celebrate the 10th anniversary, and it's going to be a free day of entry into the College Football Hall of Fame. But when people are in town for our game, they need to go through there because it's a whole new experience through AI. It's the whole experience. You got an EA Sports, Microsoft whole gaming site. You've got AI throughout the whole complex. I mean, it's going to be a totally unique and different experience than people have gone through the last 10 years. So that's a must do. And then you've got, obviously, you got the aquarium and the World of Coke. Different things to see right downtown if you're staying downtown. And then, Saturday morning, you wake up and it's game day. And so we've got a tailgate town right next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium with all kind of activation, games, things to do, ways to participate. And then our team walks, as I said, at 9:45 and 9:50, and the gates open at 10 o'clock. And we found that, in the case of a lot of these schools now, they want to get into the stadium because they think they're suiting up. They want to get in and watch the guys warm up, particularly with the first game. As you get to a second, third game, sometimes it's people spend more time tailgating. But the first game, people are so excited they can't wait to get in the stadium. And especially after you excite them with a team walk, they're ready to follow the teams right into the stadium. So it's going to be electric atmosphere. And, I just can't wait to get this thing kicked off.
Absolutely. And when you look at these two teams, Gary, obviously you mentioned the resumes that they walk into the stadium with. Just in your eyes, when you look at, okay, how do we shape this matchup? This is a top 15 matchup. There's playoff implications of, okay, if Clemson does this, then this is what potentially the rest of the season could look like. And with the matchup back in Atlanta, I'm sure the conversation in the locker rooms will be, hey, if things go our way, we could be back here in January or even for a quarter, like a college football playoff game, and then another game in Atlanta. But in your eyes, how do these two teams get back to Atlanta and try to hoist that crown in late January?
Yeah, it's interesting. You could even see a matchup potentially. In the case of Clemson, a couple of things. One is, their offensive line has some experience now. They were young last year. They've got to step up. Georgia's defense is one of the top 5 in the country, top 10 in the country. And, they come at you in a lot of different ways on defense. Kirby's a defense aficionado and taken after Nick Saban. And so I think it starts on the offense and defensive lines, which that's where college football's won now, on the offense and defensive line. You got to be good, and you got to be experienced, and you got to be deep, right? And then secondly, it goes from there to the quarterback. And in case of Clemson, Cade Klubnik needs to step up this year and have a great year. He's got better wide receivers. Maffa's an excellent running back. So that to me is the key to the game, is whether Cade Klubnik can step up this year and have a great year, check down, throw it away, don't run like he's in high school, be a manager of the game and play well and do the things, make the plays he needs to make, right? And Riley needs to step up as well. So I think that's the key to me to the whole game is Cade Klubnik and Riley and that offense and offensive line. Defensively, Clemson's top 5, top 10 defense in the country. Carson Beck's going to have a tough time against that defense. So, the defenses are going to keep both teams in the game. To me, it typically comes down in college football now, which quarterback's going to step up, make the right plays, not always the big play, but the smart plays and the right plays. And then to your second point of how they get back here, I think in looking at the CFP selection committee and the playoff, the way it's formed, you still remember have 2 years left of the original 12-year contract where the Rose Bowl still has contracts with the Big Ten. Pac-12, as we know, is no longer in business. The Sugar Bowl still has a contract with the SEC and the Big 12. So if you look at the top 4 conference champions getting automatic buys are going to come from the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 10. The Big 10 champ's going to go to the Rose Bowl. The highest ranked champ between the SEC and the Big 12 is going to go to the Sugar Bowl. So let's say the SEC, if you take preseason, Georgia's number 1, let's say they win the SEC, they would go to the Sugar Bowl. The Big 12 winner, let's say it's Utah. Utah would go to the Fiesta Bowl, and then the ACC champ, because the Orange Bowl has the semifinal, that's where the ACC has their contract. They become, so to speak, a free agent. They would come to Atlanta in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. So I think that's the way you're going to see it play out. Now, that is going to be an opportunity for Clemson if they win the ACC to get back to Atlanta and play in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. And then if they win that, against a first round opponent, then they move on to either the Orange or the Cotton Bowl. The one thing that people have to remember is once the brackets are established, they're not going to change them. So in other words, if you had Michigan, Ohio State, they're not going to change those 2 up because they played in the regular season. If that's where they're scheduled to play, then they play that game again and move along in the bracket.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Tell you what, I will finish this up with 2 questions. Number one, can we expect to see Clemson in Atlanta other than maybe this year? Or are there, plans in the works to get Clemson back to Mercedes-Benz at some point in the future?
Well, from your lips to God's ears to Graham Neff's ears. We really love to have Clemson. I remember when Kirby Smart got the Georgia job. He had been at Alabama, as we know, and he had seen Alabama playing in our Chick-fil-A kickoff game at the time, what it meant to Alabama. And when he got the Georgia job, he called me and said, "Gary, we will play in the kickoff game as many times as you'll have us." And so we scheduled Georgia in 16. We scheduled them in 20. We lost it because of COVID. We scheduled them in 22. Here they are playing in 24. And so, but what happened, David, is when the commissioners came out with the 12-team playoff 2 years ago, and it got stymied because the alliance was created between the ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12. So they pushed it back until starting to this year. What happened then was the ADs started to schedule out big home and home games because they said, with a 12-team playoff, we can lose a conference game and probably lose a tough non-conference game and have 2 losses and still get into a 12-team playoff. With a 14 playoff, no team with 2 losses has ever made it in the first 10 years. And so they started to get aggressive in scheduling home and homes. We've started to see now with the confluence of realignment that some of these home and homes have been canceled. Auburn canceled home and home with UCLA. Georgia canceled a home and home with UCLA. So some of the ADs are starting to look at it now and say, well, particularly in the SEC, hey, you brought Texas and Oklahoma in. We got to play them every year. I'm not sure we want to play another big home and home tough game. And so, I think there's some realignment of scheduling that could go on. Secondly, the SEC, I don't think so much in the ACC, but the SEC is contemplating going to a 9-game conference schedule that, would mean more money from ESPN. And if they do that, it would be in 26. If they go in that direction, now the inventory on kickoff game opportunities shrinks. And so it's going to make it a little bit more difficult. So remains to be seen. We're scheduled next year. We have South Carolina, Virginia Tech in the Beamer Bowl to open the season. And then on Monday, we have Tennessee and Syracuse. So we have 2 games next year, and then 26 remains to be seen. But, in the case of Clemson, we'd love to get Clemson as many times as we can. And to me, it makes a lot of sense for Clemson. Most of their big donors are in Atlanta. Most of their alumni lives in Metro Atlanta. Most of their people can get here in an easy drive. They can almost drive in and drive out and not have to spend money in a hotel. And at the end of the day, this is a big recruiting base for Clemson.
Huge.
So for all those reasons and the financial windfall that you can get in playing one of these games, it makes great deal of sense to me for Clemson to play in this on a continual basis.
And then to have a little fun to end this up, and again, we appreciate it. To show my age, I'm going to say a name that you will recognize, but I'm in a group called Skeeter Francis on Facebook. You remember the great Skeeter Francis?
Loved his
And
loved his sport coats.
Love Skeeter sports coat. So anyway, one of my friends who's an NC State grad does a lot of the historical stuff up there, posted a picture the other day, and it led me kind of down a rabbit hole. And I found a picture, which I will not show here. And I was looking at the 1978 NC State men's basketball team. Norm Sloan, the great Norm Sloan, the head coach. And I'm like, well, that guy kind of there in the back in the red coat looks familiar. And it's one Gary Stokan with hair and a red coat and a red tie. What was it like, number one, working with Norm Sloan, and how did Gary Stokan go from, assistant basketball coach or whatever, student, whatever you were doing then, to running this, college football in Atlanta?
Well, I thought you were going to show a picture of me in my uniform with splinters coming out of my ass, um, because I had played basketball at North Carolina State and picked splinters out of my ass. Got my education paid for. Started one game, but I'll tell you couple quick stories if you have the time. One was, it used to be that the Big Four tournament was held in Greensboro to start the season, similar to our kickoff game. And it was some of the impetus of me starting the kickoff game, ironically enough. But we used to, NC State, Carolina, Duke, and then Wake Forest used to play to start the season 2 games in Greensboro. And it was 1976, I guess, when I was a sophomore, I think, or junior. Anyway, we were playing open up with Carolina. And all 4 teams, State, Duke, Wake, and Carolina, were all ranked in the top 18 that year to start the season. So somebody was going to come out with 2 losses to start the season because you played 2 nights in a row in Greensboro Coliseum. And so we're opening with Carolina, and Norm Sloan, my coach, and Dean Smith didn't get along because it was a huge rivalry, right? And so Dean Smith used to have, you remember this, David, Grayson, you may remember it, but Dean used to have his starters play for 5 minutes, and then he'd put in his blue team to give the starters a rest because everybody's pumped up at the beginning of the game. And so Norm said, Gary, you're the captain of the red team. And every time that blue team gets up to go in the game, I want you to get your 4 guys and you guys beat them up to the scores table. And, you go in and play the game. So we get there, ball tips up, you got Walter Davis and Kenny Carr and, all these great players playing. And so I'm not watching the game. I'm looking down at the opposite bench because Mickey Bell was the captain of the Carolina blue team. And I'm watching for Mickey Bell to stand up. So he stands up. I get my guys. We run up to the scores table in Greensboro Coliseum. And, I'm a midget. I'm 5'11". These guys are 7 foot, 6'8", 6'9". Their legs are out on the floor, And then all of a sudden, Carolina's 5 guys come up. So there's 10 of us at the scores table, waiting to get in. They sound the horn. There's a dead ball. They sound the horn. All 10 of us go in. All 10 starters come out. We play for 5 minutes. All 5, the horn sounds. All 5 starters go back in. Dean and Norm did it the whole game. And so the fans are laughing, but that was a great time. But anyway, after I was done playing at NC State, I remember I was going home to Pittsburgh I was going to go coach basketball and be a high school teacher. And Norm said, what are you going to do? And I told him, and he said, no. You're going to stay with me. You stay at NC State, become one of my assistant coaches, because it's easier if you don't like college, you can go back to high school than it is if you start in high school to try and get a college job. And Norm liked me. I had hustled my ass off. I had good grades. I was a good teammate. I won the John Speaks Leadership Award, which was unusual for someone that didn't start or play a lot. And so I was there at NC State for 3 years, and then Norm took the Florida job, and he wanted me to go to Florida with him. Jimmy Valvano came in at NC State, wanted me to stay at State, and I had seen some seamier sides of recruiting with bags of money change hands and decided I didn't want to be around that. And Norm told me, he said, hey, Gary, you're smart, you're a hard worker. Get the hell out of this business and get into business. You'll be very successful. And I wound up from coaching, getting a job with Adidas, and then signing Mike Krzyzewski, signing Herschel Walker, Terry Holland, Carl Malone, Muggsy Bogues, doing extending contracts with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, having Michael Jordan ready to sign with Adidas, and the Europeans didn't give me the money, and that's why he signed with Nike. We could have put
And they
Nike.
made a movie out of it.
Yeah, and the movie was movie wasn't accurate. I mean, Sonny Vaccaro is a really good friend, and we wound up working together. You know, when he signed Kobe Bryant in 1996, he suggested to the owner, John Louis Dreyfus, to hire me to be the global basketball uh, director for all of Adidas. And I wound up taking the job and launched Kobe. I put together Kobe's first shoe and Kobe's first global marketing campaign. And we sold out all of his shoes, all of his clothes. And, you know, Kobe did a lot to launch himself, but I had put together, you know, his shoe and his global marketing campaign.
Oh,
But on the Jordan thing, I had Michael ready to sign with Adidas. There's a book called Swoosh that was written by Rob Strausser's wife, and Rob was the guy in the movie who was played by
Matt Damon. Was it Matt
yeah.
Damon?
No,
Yeah.
Matt Damon was Sonny, but I can't remember
Oh, yeah,
who.
that's right. That's right.
So Strausser, um, you know, they had tried to sign Magic or Jordan, and Michael had in the book. It's written that when Michael came out of the meeting with Nike, Michael's dad said, "Well, we got to sign with Nike. This is a great deal." And David Falk, who was Michael's agent, said, "Yeah, let's sign with Nike. We got to do this." And Michael's quoted in the book, Swoosh, "No, I want to sign with Adidas," because I had taken care of him at Carolina with him and his family with Adidas stuff, shoes and clothes and everything. And so when they came back from Beaverton, meeting with Nike, I was 29. Michael was probably 23, maybe 24. And he always called me Mr. Stokan. He said, "Mr. Stokan, can you meet?" And I said, "Sure, Michael, we'll meet." And we met on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill, where there's a stone wall that starts the Carolina campus right across from the Four Corners restaurant.
Yeah.
And I went in and got a couple Coca-Colas, and Michael and I sat on that wall drinking Coca-Cola. And he said, "Mr. Stokan, I love you. You've been great to me. You've been great to my family. If you can get close on the car, the shoes, the apparel program, you know, the annuity, I'll sign with Adidas. I love you and I love your product." And so I wrote up this 3-page marketing campaign, sent it to Herzogenaurach, West Germany, which the wall was up, which in the movie, I think they had Michael going to Munich, Germany or something. And Michael never went to Germany with his family. So that was false in the movie. But anyway, the Europeans come back to me and after looking at this, and at the time, if you read the book Shoe Dogs, which is Phil Knight's book, he says in 1984, when Michael came out, that they were bordering on bankruptcy. He could not find a bank to fund the potential growth of Nike. And so they're in the red big time. You know, Adidas is number one in the world. You know, if we sign Michael, Nike might never been in business. They might have gone out of business because the Europeans came back to me and said, "We don't have that kind of money to put in the US market." It was $2.5 million. We don't sign Michael. Nike signs him. He sells $126 million of Air Jordan products his rookie season, which puts Nike in the black. And now Michael's own brand, the Air Jordan brand's worth $7 billion, right? And so fast forward a year later, I take my family after to go on vacation, and we're walking through the Atlantis in the Bahamas to go to dinner. So we got to walk through the casino to get there. And over on the left-hand side, there's jewelry shops and clothes shops and a cigar shop. And my daughter at the time, I had 2 daughters, 10 and 8. My 10-year-old says, "There's Michael Jordan over there by the cigar shop." I said, "Yeah, it is. Let's walk over." We walk over, and he's got Ahmad Rashad, Charles Barkley, and Charles Oakley with him, because Michael used to run his golf tournament down in the Bahamas every year. So I walk over toward him, and he sees me, and he says, "Gee, come here." He puts me in a headlock, and he looks at my daughter. My daughter's never forgot this. And Michael looks at my daughters, and he says, "Your dad is the hardest working white man in sports. My daughters never forgot that. And then Michael went on to tell the story of how I had taken care of him. He loved Adidas, told me he wanted to sign with Adidas in the worst way. He said, but yeah, Gary didn't think I could play, and that's why Adidas didn't sign me. So he stuck a dagger right like Michael will do, right? But yeah,
I'm not
that's
saying that I wore Air Jordans to high school, but I probably, yeah, I did.
well, the Air movie, Michael Sonny never went to the Jordan house. You know, David Falk's the one that got Michael's mom to get Michael to go to Nike, because Michael said, no, I'm not going. I'm signing with Adidas. I don't want to go to Nike. And we had him. And so I signed Herschel Walker, the greatest college football player ever. I signed Mike Krzyzewski, the greatest college basketball coach ever. And I had Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player ever. And, I had all three of them signed, but they didn't give me the money to sign them. So,
Man,
Well,
we need to bring him
if
back
if
for
you're
just
gonna
a
give out,
podcast on that.
yeah, that's a whole podcast. That's
Yeah.
if
Oh,
you're gonna
man.
give out apparel, just to kind of, as I said, just to make this lighthearted. If you can get me and Grayson a leather helmet to wear in the press box during the game, that would be great. I've always kind of wanted to put that on. But anyway,
okay, I may get Matt Garvey to bring one up there and exhibit it in the press box, and maybe you guys can put it on and do your Heisman pose and take pictures.
that'd be great.
I'm cool with
Matt
that.
does a great job. You've got a good one in Matt Garvey, no doubt.
We're blessed. Matt does a great job. Our whole staff is flawless in its execution, so we're very blessed.
And we're excited to get to Atlanta on the 31st. And I think, David, if you don't have anything else, Gary, I think we're ready to wrap things up here. But we want to thank you for your time, Gary. This was the Orange Crush podcast with David Hood, Grayson Mann here, coming at you with another special guest star. We had Jeff Scott last week. We got Gary Stokan breaking down all things Aflac kickoff game. We're super excited to be there on the 31st. We appreciate your time, Gary. Thank you.
Grayson and David, thanks so much for having us, and we look forward to hosting you when you get down here in Atlanta.